The year was 1975. Honda introduced a motorcycle that would change touring forever, the Goldwing. The legend continues today, more than a quarter century later, as the totally redesigned Goldwing continues to set the standard for touring performance and comfort. Honda engineers started by building the biggest production motorcycle engine in the world. A powerful 1800 32cc liquid-cooled flat-six engine, boasting 1/3 more power than its predecessor. Add to that a technical package requiring 20 new patents, available anti-lock brakes, and a revolutionary new suspension system. The bigger, stronger, lighter GL 1800 has the cruising power and comfort you expect in a Goldwing, with an unprecedented dose of performance. Welcome to this program covering the GL 1800's dynamic new suspension system. After viewing this program, you will be able to identify the key features and components of the GL 1800 suspension system, describe their functions, as well as the efficient way to remove and install the wheels and change the brake pads. Let's start with an overview of the frame, which has been totally redesigned. This all-aluminum frame assembly is 25 pounds lighter than the steel frame it replaces. This new frame has been specially designed for the optimal balance of rigidity and tuned flex. Inside the cast aluminum front spars, the multi-box section design improves the strength and rigidity of the frame, which translates into superb handling. This lightweight, rigid frame literally sets the stage for better performance, helping to reduce the drag coefficient by an amazing 10% and complementing several key new suspension features. The GL 1800's front suspension boasts massive 45mm forks with 5.5 inches of travel. The right leg of the fork has a cartridge damper that provides a smooth ride under a wide range of road conditions. The left leg of the fork features a new anti-dive system that enhances stability under hard braking. Stopping power is provided by dual full-floating 296mm front disc brakes with 3-piston calipers. It's important to point out the Goldwing uses the Honda Linked Braking System, or LBS. The linked braking system has both primary and secondary master cylinders. So what does this secondary master cylinder have to do with the anti-dive system? The answer is everything. You see, the anti-dive front suspension system actually uses brake fluid pressure to limit oil flow in the left front fork. When either or both the front and rear brakes are applied, the anti-dive system uses hydraulic pressure from the secondary master cylinder on the left front fork to reduce front fork dive. This advanced new front suspension literally delivers the best of both worlds: smooth damping for open road cruising and firm anti-dive control for responsive handling. Now, let's move on to the rear suspension. The GL 1800 features a Pro-Arm single-sided swing arm with the drive shaft running inside. This new swing arm is cast aluminum and highly rigid. And not only does it help reduce overall weight and improve handling, the new swing arm also simplifies service procedures, like removing the rear wheel, which we'll see in detail a little later. Another new feature of the rear suspension is the ProLink electronically controlled spring preload adjustment, complete with 2 memory settings. This preload system electronically controls the spring tension of the rear shock, enhancing either relaxed touring or sport riding. The shock provides up to 4.1 inches of travel. With this advanced new system, the preload of this rear shock can be electronically controlled, and 2 separate settings can be stored in its memory. Here's how to set the spring preload adjustment. With the Goldwing on its center stand, verify the transmissions in neutral. The suspension can be adjusted with the ignition switch in the on or accessory position. Then press the down or up side of the manual height switch. This button adjusts the rear suspension to one of 26 positions, with 0 being the least preload and 25 the most. The multi-display screen will show the selected position. After you've adjusted the suspension to the setting you want, store the setting by pressing and holding the memory button until the Store Memory message blinks in the multi-display screen. Lower settings provide softer rides and are usually preferred for light loads and smooth roads. Higher settings provide firmer rides and are recommended for heavier loads and rough road conditions. As we mentioned earlier, in addition to improved performance, the new rear single-sided swing arm and suspension make it easier to service the rear wheel. With the GL on its center stand, remove the rear fender, starting with the flange bolt and 4 setting bolts. Then release the saddlebag tabs and be very careful not to damage them in the process. Remove one bolt from the rear frame cross brace and loosen the other. If your lift has a drop panel like this one, the wheel can be removed with the fender and cross brace in place. Loosen the 5 rear wheel nuts while applying the rear brake to keep the wheel from moving. Slide the wheel away from the final gear case. That's all there is to it. To install the rear wheel, reassemble the parts in the reverse order of removal. Then tighten the rear wheel nuts to 108 Newton meters, or 80 pounds-feet of torque. After installing the rear wheel, apply the brake pedals several times to verify proper brake operation. Ensure the wheel rotates freely when the brake is not applied, and you've completed a rear wheel installation. Now let's replace the rear brake pads. First, push the caliper piston all the way in. Then remove the pad pin plug and loosen the pad pin. Now pull the pad pin out of the caliper body while pushing the pads firmly against the pad spring. This allows you to remove the pads. Coat the stopper ring on the pad pin end with silicone grease. Install the new brake pads into the caliper body so the ends rest properly in the pad retainer bracket, and align the pad pin holes with the caliper body. Then install the pad pin by pushing the pads against the pad spring. Tighten the pad to 18 Newton meters or 13 pounds-feet of torque. Then replace the pad pin plug and check to make sure everything works properly. Naturally, you should always replace brake pads in pairs to prevent uneven wear. And be sure to check the brake fluid level when you're done. To remove the front wheel, start by removing the front fender and fender covers. Next, on ABS models only, remove the clamp bolt and the speed sensor, being careful not to damage the sensor. Remove the 2 brake caliper mounting bolts and the right front brake caliper. Support the caliper so it doesn't hang by the brake hose. Next, loosen the right axle holder bolts and remove the front axle bolt. Then securely raise the motorcycle using a jack. Then loosen the left front axle holder bolts and remove the front axle and front wheel. Be careful not to drop any collars or spacers. That's it. When installing the front wheel, reassemble the parts in the reverse order of removal. When reinstalling the front axle, make sure the index line on the axle is properly aligned with the fork leg. Tighten the axle bolt to 59 Newton meters, or 43 pounds-feet of torque. The right caliper mounting bolts and caliper socket bolts should all be tightened to 31 Newton meters, or 23 pounds-feet of torque. Install the speed sensor and tighten the axle holder bolts. Using a 0.7 of a millimeter feeler gauge, measure the clearance between the front brake disc and caliper on both sides. If the gauge cannot be inserted easily, loosen the axle holder bolts and pull the fork outward or push it inward to adjust the clearance. Then tighten the axle holder pinch bolts to 22 Newton meters or 16 pounds-feet of torque. If the gauge does insert easily, then merely tighten the axle pinch bolts to the specified torque. After installing the front wheel, check the brakes several times to make sure they aren't sticking. Make sure the wheel rotates freely when the brake is released. To change the front brake pads, follow the same procedure we just covered for the rear brake pads. Start by pulling the piston side pad inward to depress the pistons. Then remove the pad pin plug and loosen the pad pin. Now pull the pad pin out of the caliper body while pushing the pads firmly against the pad spring. This allows you to remove the pads. Coat the stopper ring on the pad pin end with silicone grease. Install the new brake pads into the caliper body so the ends rest properly in the pad retainer bracket. Then install the pad pin by pushing the pads against the pad spring and aligning the pad pin holes with the caliper body. Tighten the pad pin to 18 Newton meters or 13 pounds-feet of torque. Then replace the pad pin plug and check to make sure everything works properly. For more information on the front suspension, the anti-dive system, and the ProLink electronically controlled rear suspension, refer to the GL 1800 service manual, which includes the electrical troubleshooting manual. For more information on suspension adjustment procedures, refer to the owner's manual. And for more information on linked and anti-lock brakes, watch the full cycle video, Braking Systems Linked and Anti-Lock. That wraps up this program on the Goldwing suspension system. At this time, you should be able to identify the key features and components of the GL 1800 suspension system, describe their functions, as well as the efficient way to remove and install the wheels and change the brake pads. We hope this information will help you satisfy your Goldwing customers so they can maximize their time enjoying the greatest touring motorcycle on earth.